the SEC's crackdown on crypto exchanges has sparked outrage from one lawmaker in Congress. Representative Warren Davidson has accused the SEC of showing complete contempt for Congress in their enforcement actions against crypto exchanges. Davidson went as far as to write a letter to the SEC, accusing the agency of overstepping its bounds and adopting policies that were never approved by Congress. He also took issue with the SEC's crackdown on what he called legitimate exchanges without any prior warning or explanation. This controversy is just the latest development in the ongoing debate over how the government should regulate cryptocurrencies. While some lawmakers believe that strong enforcement is necessary to protect...
Do you think, perhaps you can go a bit into that and how, the current lack of clarity is preventing movement in the industry?
Sure. So ultimately, it's probably fair to say that the US is behind its major developed market jurisdiction peers in regards to enacting firm legislation and guidelines regarding crypto intermediation. And we think that's actually hindering US firms just because, firstly, without the firm legal and regulatory footing, there's a number of potential risks that the firms face, not least having safe harbor rules and guidance on how to operate effectively. And we think that where particularly the largest US firms are concerned, where they have global operations, the lack of coordination with regards to the US with other leading jurisdictions such as the European Union might not play in its favor, just because ultimately peers, for instance, in Europe that do want to start intermediating on behalf of clients, they will have potentially the upper hand. That said, we think that globally, the fact that the US is a little bit behind the curve doesn't really help anyone, just because ultimately what adds to costs and complexities for all types of firms, wherever they're based, is just having an uneven regulatory playing field. And so we think that ultimately there's going to be a little bit more focus on the US to try to bridge that gap in 2023. In particular, there's a number of promising bills that have been presented. Yeah. In the US legislative houses that will hopefully get a little bit more traction. And also we know that the US president has made a focus on digital assets one of the elements within the financial system that they're focusing on. So we think there'll be a lot more traction, particularly after what's been happening in the last 2 months.
That being said, SEC Chair Gary Gensler has spoken out and said, the SEC already has the authorities to at least provide basic disclosure and governance requirements in place and hold digital asset firms accountable. He spit that, in fact, today on Yahoo Finance, and but failed to, of course, talk about crypto exchange FTX specifically. Do you think the SEC has that the guidelines for regulations in crypto firms and cryptocurrencies are already there, and the SEC has the power to enforce them if they so wish?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. It comes down to sometimes the characterization of the crypto assets themselves and indeed the services offered by crypto asset firms. So some crypto assets might well be securities, in which case they'll potentially fall under the purview of the SEC. Others might not necessarily be regarded as securities. And so if they are regarded as commodities, well, they fall outside of the jurisdiction of the SEC. And we saw that notably with regards to all these discussions concerning previous crypto assets such as XRP, and also with regards to the characterization of some of the operations of the crypto asset firms. So, for instance, BlockFi's interest accounts, the BIAs in the US were classified as being related to securities and therefore were under the purview of the SEC, which then led to that settlement earlier this year in spring. But there are other services where they might not necessarily be regarded as tied up with securities legislation, in which case they won't be. So, I mean, some of these fundamental questions about characterization still remain.
All right. Moving on, Goldman Sachs, they're looking to spend tens of millions of dollars on crypto firms based on more sensible valuations, according to Reuters. Are there opportunities out there?
Well, there's certain aspects of the technology that's underpinning some of these cryptocurrencies and the DeFi protocols that are indeed remain of significant interest to financial institutions. And I think what you quoted about Goldman doesn't strike me as being particularly odd at all. We think that there's a great deal of value in the general concept of asset tokenization, and also the use of private permissioned blockchains in order to build out particular ecosystems that can be used to transact with wholesale counterparties and potentially high net worth individuals also. We think there's also elements of the DeFi protocols that could be of interest for firms looking to advance a more leaner version of fintech and to potentially look at operating on a 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365-day basis without necessarily requiring human intervention. So I think there's lots.
And senior analyst Owen Lau to downgrade the exchange and push shares, we can see down almost 15%. It has been a rough day for Coinbase. Why the downgrade? How significant is the damage for Coinbase here?
First of all, thank you for having me. Yep, this is a rough day for Coinbase. And why the downgrade is a couple of reasons. Number one, the Wells notice. And Coinbase is a good actor in this space. And you can argue that if SEC were to take actions, many other actors may got the actions or get the kind of investigation first. And Coinbase has been operating in a relatively transparent way. So I am actually pretty surprised to see Coinbase get the Wells notice. And to me, this is an indication that there will be more enforcement actions against not just Coinbase, but the whole industry. And then the second reason being, not many people talk about the economic report of the president, got published on Monday. And it got actually a lot of the response from the crypto industry. And in that report, the report has a lot of criticism against the utility of digital assets, which is a big change from the Treasury statement from last year.
Oh, and when it comes to the likelihood, though, of passing some crypto-related bills, at least in the near term, is that likely? Or when do you think we'll see a wider crackdown here from regulators?
I actually went to D.C. yesterday. I attended an event. I talked to some staff members in the Congress and also talked to some industry experts on the ground. My impression from my conversation is the probability of passing a bill like classify which one is securities, which one is commodities, or which agency would oversee crypto exchanges like Coinbase is very low. I mean, it doesn't mean that it won't happen, but based on my conversation, I'm not optimistic about that. So what that means is before we have a regulatory clarity, there will be a vacuum for more enforcement actions. And that's the number one thing I am very worried about.
Where will regulation eventually come from? Will it be the SEC, the CFTC? Will Congress agree on the rules of the road? Where does it need to come from?
It needs to come from the Congress. We need to have a legal framework first. We need to get the bipartisan support. Based on my conversation yesterday, I was hopeful that there may be a new bill coming out next month or so, but you never know. You never count on a new bill coming out and get the bipartisan support from everybody. And based on the economic report, I think that probability is also very low.
No, and despite all these concerns, despite the uncertainty out there, the price of Bitcoin has held up remarkably well. We're looking at it above 28,000 today. Last month, it's been a gain of just over 17%. The last 6 months, a gain of 45%. What do you make of this consistent momentum, essentially, to the upside here in Bitcoin?
So the run actually starts from, I think, 2 weeks ago when Signature Bank went down or got shut down. And that one tells me that people may be worried about the traditional banking system in the United States, and they may view Bitcoin as a safe haven. We can argue that whether this is true or not, but based on the relative performance, if you look at S&P 500 or BKX and Bitcoin outperformed a lot over the past 2 weeks. So this is an indication that people would rather put their money into Bitcoin, which is more like a decentralized network, decentralized system. They don't have a single point of failure, unlike traditional banking system. And I think that sentiment drives that run over the past 2 weeks.
Indeed. All right, just want to make sure we get in the statement from Coinbase. They told us, the SEC staff told us they have identified potential violations of securities law, but little more. We asked the SEC specifically to identify which assets on our platforms they believe may be securities, and they declined to do so. Just want to make sure we got in both sides of this. Owen, really appreciate your insights here. Thank you so